Vishnupad Paramhamsa Parisharasto Charasata Shishimad. His Divine Grace Srilesi Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Gantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Tagore Premanande Hari Hari Bol. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto number 3, chapter number 14, titled The Pregnancy of Diti in the Evening. Text number 30. Maitreya Vacha Sevam Samvidite Bhartra Sevam Samvidite Bhartra Manmatonmati Dendriya Manmatonmati Tendriya Jagraha Vaso Brahmarse Jagraha Vaso Brahmarse Vrisaliva Gatatrapa Vrisaliva Gatatrapa Maitreya Vacha Sevam Samvidite Bhartra Manmatonmati Tendriya Jagraha Vaso Brahmarise Vrisaliva Gatatrapa Maitreya Vacha Sevam Samvidite Bhartra Manmatonmati Tendriya Jagraha Vaso Brahmarise Vrisaliva Gatatrapa Word for word translation, Maitreya Vacha. Maitreya said, Sa, she, evam, thus, samvidite, in spite of being informed, Bhartra, by her husband, Manmata, by Cupid. Unmatita, being pressed. Indriya, senses. Jagraha, caught hold of. Vasaha, clothing. Brahma Risehe, of the great Brahmana sage. Vrisali, public prostitute. Iva, like. Gatatrapa, without shame. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation, Maitreya said, Diti was thus informed by her husband, but she was pressed by Cupid for sexual satisfaction. She caught hold of the clothing of the great Brahmana sage, just like a shameless public prostitute. Purport, the difference between a married wife and a public prostitute is that one is restrained in sex life by the rules and regulations of the scriptures, whereas the other is unrestricted in sex life and is conducted solely by the strong sex urge. Although very enlightened, Kasyapa, the great sage, became a victim of his prostitute wife. Such is the strong force of mature energy. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chaksulmanitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everyone. Thank you for coming to Srimad Bhagavatam class, and happy Ekadasi for everyone. So we're continuing our discussion from 3rd Canto, chapter 14, titled The Pregnancy of Diti in the Evening. And in this purport of today's verse is a short purport. Prabhupada is highlighting the power of Maya, highlighting the power of the illusory energy. Prabhupada is explaining how we've been hearing recently over the past week or so about the great position of Kasyapa Muni and also the elevated position of Diti. They're no ordinary personalities. Kasyapa Muni is none other than the father of the Supreme Personal Godhead, as Lord Vamanadev. So if someone is giving birth to the Supreme Personal Godhead, if the Supreme Personal Godhead is descending in someone's family, then naturally that personality must be a very great elevated soul. So in the past classes, different devotees have been emphasizing on this point about how Kasyapa Muni is no ordinary personality. But in this particular pastime, we're seeing, Prabhupada is highlighting the point, how in this instance, we're seeing Kasyapa, he's slightly drifting away. And Prabhupada is using this to help us understand the power of the illusory energy. Prabhupada is explaining how Kasyapa Muni, he's such a great sage, he is such a great rishi, so much more advanced than all of us. But despite him being so elevated, despite him being so advanced, such an advanced transcendentalist, still he's being affected by the illusory energy. That's why Prabhupada, in the purport, he ends by saying, such is the strong force of the mature energy. So the thing Prabhupada wants us to learn from, one of the lessons Prabhupada wants to learn from this particular pastime is the power of the illusory energy and how we should have this healthy fear for Maya, for Durga Devi, for the influence of the illusory energy of the Lord. In one purport of 10th Canto of Bhagavatam, Prabhupada, he explains how different anarthas in our spiritual lives we can overcome by positively engaging it in devotional service. Prabhupada gives the example, just like lust. How does one overcome lust? Prabhupada says, instead of being lusty, instead of having strong desires to gratify our own senses, we become lusty to gratify Krishna's senses. So a materialistic man in society, he'll be lusty to satisfy his sense of sight, sense of smell, tongue, so on and so forth. And Prabhupada is explaining in 10th canto that same mature lust one can eliminate, one can overcome by just dovetailing that for satisfying Krishna's senses. Instead of thinking about how I can get pleasure, Prabhupada says we should just meditate and become very enthusiastic, become very lusty to gratify Krishna's senses. So when we sing and dance in kirtan, we should be thinking, okay, let me sing very nicely and loudly, so Shri Shri Radha Gopinath will be pleased, so I can bring pleasure to the ears of Shri Shri Radha Gopinath. In 11th canto of Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada's disciples, they quote Srila Bhaktisanta Saraswati Maharaj. And Srila Bhaktisanta Saraswati Maharaj, he says that any devotee who very loudly chants in Krishna Kirtan, for that devotee, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu personally comes and eliminates all material desires in his heart. So I always like to remember that when I'm singing in Kirtan, that we should sing very loudly. If we do, then Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he becomes very pleased and he'll personally come and cleanse the heart of all material desires. So when we're in Kirtan, we sing nicely, in tune, we sing loudly to bring pleasure to the transcendental ears of Shri Shri Radha Gopinath, to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and also we try and dance very nicely. And why do we dance very nicely? To bring pleasure to Krishna's transcendental eyes. By singing loudly, we bring pleasure to Krishna's ears. By dancing nicely, it's a nice little, dramatic performance for Radha Gopinath. They're sitting there on their simhasan, and from their high position, they're looking down and they're seeing all of their sons and daughters dancing so nicely for their pleasure. So, like that, Prabhupada explains, just like material lust, instead of always thinking about me and my senses, how can I gratify my eyes, how can I gratify my ears, instead we dovetail that same intense desire to intensely desire to satisfy Shri Shri Radha Gopinath. How can I bring pleasure to Radha Gopinath's eyes, to the ears, and also to their tongue? So when we're cooking for their lordships, it's such a great opportunity. We're trying to satisfy Krishna's tongue. So in this way, Prabhupada explains that different anarthas we can overcome by positively engaging it, dovetailing in Krishna's service. And Prabhupada talks about lust, and Prabhupada also talks about fear. And in relation to fear, Prabhupada explains that material fear we can overcome by being afraid of the illusory energy of the Lord. So that's how you spiritually transform fear. In material life, we have many material fears. For example, my Guru Maharaj always talks about this thing that devotees go through about the fear of surrendering fully to Krishna. If I fully surrender to Krishna, what will happen to me? What will happen to my life? I won't be happy anymore. I need to be half in Maya and half in Krishna. If I go fully into Krishna, then devotees have this fear, what will happen to me? So how do we overcome that material fear? Srila Prabhupada explains you can overcome material fears by being afraid of Maya, by being afraid of the illusory energy of the Lord. So yes, devotees are also afraid. There is spiritual fear that devotees should have, and that spiritual fear is the fear of the illusory energy of the Lord. One time, Srila Prabhupada was taking darshan of the deities, and one of Prabhupada's disciples, they had the courage, the guts to ask Srila Prabhupada, today we saw you praying to the deities, what were you, if you don't mind, what were you praying for? And Prabhupada, he revealed that I was praying to Srimati Radharani to please protect me from the illusory energy of the Lord. So in this way, Prabhupada, although Prabhupada is a Nityasiddha devotee of the Lord, although he can never be swayed by the material energy, Prabhupada, by his example, he's teaching us how we should always have that fear of the illusory energy of the Lord. We should never think that I'm very advanced or, I've got it under control. We should always have the fear of the illusory energy of the Lord. That's why in the Shastras, again and again, they'll give us many examples of not ordinary persons, but great, great transcendentalists who had a little fall down to help us understand or to highlight the point about how powerful is the illusory energy of the Lord. And if even great transcendentalists such as Kashyapa Muni, if they can also divert from the path, then what to speak of us? How much more careful and attentive we must be when we're practicing our spiritual life. Srila Prabhupada in some of his purports, he gives the example of a razor blade. Just like when you're shaving, we have to be very attentively, we have to shave. And Prabhupada explains, if you're a little inattentive, then you can cut yourself. And if you cut yourself, then blood will start coming out. So just like when we're shaving our head or our faces, we have to very attentively shave. If we don't do attentively, then a little diversion can cause blood. In the same way, Prabhupada explains that spiritual life is also like that we have to very attentively, very strictly follow all the rules and the regulations, and we need to have that healthy fear of Maya. And fear also, in other places Prabhupada explains, we should be afraid of committing offenses, Seva Prad, and also, more importantly, Vaishnava Prad. Mahaprabhu, he talks about this in his instructions to Srila Rupa Goswami. And I like how Mahaprabhu, the analogy Mahaprabhu gives regarding offenses. Mahaprabhu says, okay, we got the Guru Krishna Prasade Pai Bhakti Lata Beach, we get the seed of devotional service by the mercy of Guru and Krishna. Then we sow it in our hearts, and then to get the seed to sprout, one needs to water the seed. So that watering process Mahaprabhu compares to hearing and chanting about Krishna. Hearing and chanting Srimad Bhagavatam, hearing and chanting Hare Krishna. So by taking shelter of the Bhagavatam, of Srila Prabhupada's books, taking shelter of Nama Prabhu, taking shelter of the holy name, we water the devotional seed, and it slowly starts sprouting up, and the devotional creeper grows. Next, Mahaprabhu explains to Rupa Goswami, there is one problem. What is that? That, okay, we have this nice garden and we sowed the seed of bhakti, but there is many animals that can run into the garden and start negatively, affecting the creeper. Start eating on the creeper, so on and so forth. So what are these animals that might come into the garden? Mahaprabhu explains, these animals are offenses. And Mahaprabhu explains, there are small animals and there are big animals that can come in. The small animals, Mahaprabhu explains, are minor offenses or lesser offenses, for example, Seva Prad. And the bigger animals, like the big elephant, which if it comes in, it will just completely destroy the whole garden. The bigger elephant or the biggest animal that can come into the garden, Mahaprabhu says, is the offense against the Vaishnavas, Vaishnava Prad. So in this way, Mahaprabhu explains that the devotee, the spiritualist, he should be aware that, okay, he's doing his first duty to water the plant, but along with watering the plant, he should be aware, he should be afraid, he should have that healthy fear of animals creeping into the garden, animals running into the garden and destroying the creeper. So there's small animals, Seva Prad offenses we can commit while we're engaging in devotional service, and there's the bigger offense of the elephant coming in, that's Vaishnava Prad. So what's the solution Mahaprabhu gives of how we can avoid these animals running into our garden? And Mahaprabhu says, very simple, you just build a fence around your garden. You build a very nice strong fence around your garden, then the small animals and the biggest animal, elephant, they can't come in. The fence will protect your creeper from being affected by these offenses. So what does that fence represent? Prabhupada in his purport, he elaborates the meaning of the fence. Prabhupada explains, the fence is the good association of sincere devotees. And the fence also, Prabhupada explains, is us strictly following the instructions of the spiritual master. If we're very strictly following all the instructions of all of our gurus, of all of our Siksha gurus, of Srila Prabhupada, our preeminent Siksha guru, then those instructions will protect us from making offenses against the Lord while we're engaged in service, and those offenses, those instructions will protect us also from making offenses against the Vaishnavas. For example, our teachers will explain, about the importance of Vaishnavas, about proper etiquette in dealing with Vaishnavas. So when we remember these instructions, when we follow these instructions, then naturally, when we see other Vaishnavas, when we associate with other Vaishnavas, we look at them with proper respect and we deal with them appropriately. And that will save us from committing aparadhs. That will save us from these animals creeping in. So that's the fence that protects us, that following strictly the instructions of the spiritual master. And secondly, Prabhupada says the fence also represents us surrounding ourselves with nice, sincere devotees. That will also protect us from offenses. For example, if we're in a nice sangha of devotees and we're going a bit off track, say we talked a bit harshly, insensitively with another devotee, then we might not realize, being overcome by ignorance or anger. But these other devotees in our friend circle who are around us, they will notice that from a third perspective, and they will come and tell us that, Prabhu, while you were talking with this other devotee, I thought, you weren't sensitive enough, you might have slightly offended him. Maybe you should go and apologize, just to be safe. So in this way, we're protected in that sense also from committing Vaishnava Aparad, from committing Seva Aparad also. For example, if we're engaged in any particular service of the Lord, and if we're doing it in the sangha of other devotees, then if we're doing a service incorrectly or inappropriately, then the other devotees around us, they will point that out, they'll correct us, that okay, we don't do it like this is the proper way to do it. So in this way, we're also protected from Seva Aparads also. So in this way, Prabhupada explains that when Mahaprabhu is talking about building a fence around a bhakti garden, that refers to us surrounding ourselves with nice, sincere devotees of the Lord, keeping ourselves in good association, and also of us very strictly following all the rules and regulations given by the Acharya, given by the spiritual master. Regarding following all the rules and regulations, I remember one analogy that the disciples of Srila Prabhupada, they used in 11th canto, I think quoting the previous acharyas. They give the example of a river flowing in the valley. So a river will be flowing in the valley, and the valley has two sides. There's two dips, one side this way, one side that way. And the valley will swerve in a certain direction, and the river will flow in that direction. And the acharyas explain that these two sides of the valley, they represent all the rules and regulations given by the Guru, given by the Shastras. If one of the sides just falls down, then what will happen to the water? The water, instead of going from point A to the ocean, will just disperse and go out onto the land. So these two sides of the valley, that's compared to rules and regulations. We need to very strictly keep them firm. If they're kept firm and stable, then the water will flow from point A and go to the destination, go to the ocean. Go to Shri Shri Radha Gopinath's lotus feet. Go back home, back to Godhead, to Goloka Vrindavan. If one of the sides of the valley collapses, then the water can't flow to the ocean. The water will disperse out onto the land. So that's one nice analogy given in the purports of 11th canto. So in this way, Srila Prabhupada explains that we need to have this healthy fear against the illusory energy of Lord, and we need to have healthy fear against committing offenses. And by this healthy fear, we can overcome material fears. In a similar context, slightly different, but I was reading recently in Chaitanya Charitamrita, one purport, Prabhupada is explaining about different attachments in the material world and how we can overcome these different attachments. Firstly, Prabhupada is talking about the attachment between, or attraction between male and female, which Prabhupada is talking about in some of the purports on this section. Prabhupada is saying this purport that one can overcome the attraction between the opposite sexes by simply listening and hearing the pastimes of Krishna and the gopis. Then next, Prabhupada is saying family attachment. That's another type of attachment in this material world. Attachment for our family members, attachment for our children, attachment between husband and wife, attachment between brother and sister, so on and so forth. How do we overcome family attachment? Again, then next, Prabhupada says, one can overcome family attachment by simply hearing about the pastimes of Krishna and Mother Yasoda and Nanda Maharaj. By hearing about the parental pastimes of Krishna and Mother Yasoda and Nanda Maharaj, And taking shelter of these pastimes, one can overcome all family attachments. Then, Prabhupada explains, in the material world, we have material attachments to material friends. And how do we overcome attachment to material friends? Prabhupada explains, again, by opening up the Krishna book and reading Krishna's pastimes with his cowherd boyfriends, by seeing how such a wonderful friend Krishna is, by seeing how Krishna is the best friend of the living entity. Prabhupada again explains we can overcome all material friendships. Same thing with service. Prabhupada explains in this material world, we're all attached to serving our bosses, masters, so on and so forth. And we can overcome material servitude by hearing about Krishna's wonderful pastimes in relationship with his devotees who are in Dasya Bhav. Like this, Prabhupada explains, all the different types of attachments one might have in material world, one can simply overcome all these attachments simply by reading the corresponding pastimes of Krishna in different rasas. So all we have to do is just open up Krishna book and read. We just open up Krishna book, hear pastimes of Krishna and Mother Yasoda, hear Damodar Leela, immediately we'll overcome whatever mature attachments we have for our family members. We just open up Krishna book, hear the Rasa Leela, hear about Krishna's street pastimes with the gopis, hear the beautiful prayers and the songs the gopis sing in separation from Krishna, hear about the complete surrender that the gopis had for Krishna. By hearing this, we'll overcome attraction between the opposite sexes. By hearing about Krishna dealings with their cowherd boyfriends, how wonderfully Krishna is associating with his cowherd boyfriends, we'll come to understand how actually Krishna is the best friend. There's no greater friend than Krishna. So in this way, Prabhupada very nicely explains in one purport of CC how we can overcome all mature attachments by simply opening up Krishna book and reading. So it's a short purport. I'll go to the next text, text 31. Sa vidit vata bharyayastam nirbandham vikarmani natva distaya rahasi daya topa vivesahi. Translation: understanding his wife's purpose, he was obliged to perform the forbidden act. And thus, after offering his obeisances unto worshipful fate, he lay with her in a secluded place. Purport. It appears from the talks of Kashyapa with his wife that he was a worshipper of Lord Shiva, and although he knew that Lord Shiva would not be pleased with him for such a forbidden act, he was obliged to act by his wife's desire. And thus he offered his obeisances unto faith. He knew that the child born of such untimely sexual intercourse would certainly not be a good child, but could not protect himself because he was too obligated to his wife. In a similar case, however, when Thakur Haridas was tempted by a public prostitute at the dead of night, he avoided the allurement because of his perfection in Krishna consciousness. That is the difference between a Krishna conscious person and others. Kashyapa Muni was greatly learned and enlightened, and he knew all the rules and regulations of systematic life. Yet he failed to protect himself from the attack of sex desire. Thakur Haridas was not born of a Brahmana family, nor was he himself Brahmana. Yet he could protect himself from such an attack due to his being Krishna conscious. Thakur Haridas used to chant the holy name of the Lord 300,000 times daily. Okay, so in this purport, text 31, Prabhupada is talking about how we can overcome the influence of the illusory energy of the Lord. And in this case, we're seeing a negative example of Kashyapa, and Prabhupada is highlighting a positive example of a particular devotee who was able to overcome Maya's allurement. And Prabhupada is giving the example of Haridas Thakur. And how was Haridas Thakur was able to overcome the illusory energy? Prabhupada, he says, that because of his perfection in Krishna consciousness. That's how he was able to overcome. So as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Devi hi esa gunamai mama maya durataya mam eva ye prapajante mayam etam tarantate. That yes, this divine energy of mine is very, very difficult to overcome. And that's what we're seeing in this pastime. This divine energy is so difficult to overcome that even a great learned transcendentalist like Kashyapa Muni, even he can divert from the path. So Krishna admits to Arjuna that yes, this illusory energy Lord is no doubt unconquerable, is very, very difficult to overcome. But there is one way you can overcome it. How? By surrendering unto me. Only by surrendering unto me, by rendering service unto my lotus feet, by taking shelter of Krishna consciousness, can one overcome this. In another verse, in 2nd chapter, Krishna tells Arjuna, Param Dristra Nivartate, that the way you overcome all material allurements given by the illusory energy of the Lord is by acquiring the higher taste. If you have the higher taste for my lotus feet, if you have the higher taste for Krishna consciousness, then one can easily overcome all material attachments. I remember one time Sri Prahlad Prabhu, when he was in Sydney, he was it was his Guru Maharaj's Vyasa Puja, His Holiness Indradyumna Swami Maharaj's Vyasa Puja. And Sri Prahlad Prabhu was standing there and he was giving offering for his spiritual master. And he was mentioning this point about the mood of Indradyumna Maharaj, how his mood is always about the cultivating Krishna consciousness, the positive aspect of cultivating taste for Krishna's lotus feet, for Krishna consciousness. And he was mentioning that 2 verses that his Guru Maharaj would always quote in his lectures are, one is this verse, Param Drisva Nivartate. He's saying that Indradyumna Maharaj will always quote this verse again and again and again, emphasizing to his disciples that we have to cultivate that higher taste. We have to cultivate the higher taste. We have to go deep in our chanting. We have to go deep in our Harinams. We have to go deep in reading Srila Prabhupada's books. We have to go deep in deity worship, in taking shelter of Shri Shri Radha Gopinath. And when we go deep into the process of bhakti, when we go deep, then that higher taste will become stronger and stronger. Then on the strength of that strong higher taste we have for Krishna's lotus feet, we can easily overcome all of Maya's allurements. And the second verse Sri Prahlad Prabhu was saying that Indradyumna Maharaj always quotes is Param Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam, the last line of Shikshastakam. So in this way, the Shastras explain that the best way to defeat Maya is by attacking her. As it said, attack is the best form of defense. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has one nice pastime where he talks about this. Once Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, during his tour of South India, which we see at the start of Madhya Lila, he comes across a holy place named Kurma Kshetra. And in this Kurma Kshetra, he meets a Brahmana, who's known as the Kurma Brahmana. And naturally, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Radha Krishna Nahanya. So naturally, this Brahmana, he becomes mesmerized by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's presence. He becomes completely attached to Mahaprabhu. So Mahaprabhu spends some time with this Kurma Brahmana, and then it's time for Mahaprabhu to leave. He's a sannyasi. He's on a tour of South India. He has to go from place to place. So after spending some time with the Kurma Brahmana, now it's time for Mahaprabhu to depart. So naturally, with just this short association with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, this Kurma Brahmana has developed such intense attachment to the lotus feet of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And now he can't bear separation from Mahaprabhu. And as Mahaprabhu is leaving, he is also tagging along with Mahaprabhu. And then Mahaprabhu is saying, what are you doing? You have a family, you have a wife, you have children. You can't just leave everything and come with me. Stay back, take care of your family and chant Hare Krishna. And Kurma Brahmana says, no, I love you, I'm attached to you, I don't want to do anything else. I just always want to be with you, I always want to worship with you. I can't bear separation for you. This is too much. And then Mahaprabhu instructs him. 2 very important instructions. The first verse we always hear quoted. The second verse we don't hear quoted so much, but that's also very important. So the first thing Mahaprabhu tells him is, Yare deko tareko Krishna upades amar agya guru hoy taro e des. That Mahaprabhu is telling him that whoever you meet, You preach to them about Krishna consciousness. You take up the responsibility, you become guru, you assist me, and whoever you meet, you give them Krishna. You assist me in sharing love of Godhead with others. So that's the first instruction Mahaprabhu gave him. The second thing Mahaprabhu told him is something very important. Mahaprabhu told him that if you do this, then you will always be in my presence. You will never be separated from me. Because what was the Kurma Brahmana's fear? He was saying, I can't bear separation from you. I always want to be with you, so therefore I'm leaving everything. I'm leaving my family, leaving my children, and I'll just travel with you wherever you go. So Mahaprabhu challenges that, counteracts that by saying, don't worry, you just simply do this one thing. You just always preach Krishna consciousness at every opportune moment. You try and give Krishna to others. If you do this, I will always be personally present with you. You'll never be bereft of my presence. And then, in connection to this purport, what we've been discussing, then second thing Mahaprabhu tells him, that by preaching, by giving Krishna to others, not only will I always be present with you, but you won't be affected by the illusory energy. You won't be affected by Maya. Why? Krishna Surya Sama Maya Hoya Andhaka Yahan Krishna Tara Nahi Maya Adhika. That Krishna, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he is like the sun. And Maya is like darkness. Where there is the sun, there cannot be darkness. So when we do outreach, when we engage in sharing Krishna consciousness with others, Mahaprabhu is saying, at that moment, I am personally there present with you. And because Mahaprabhu is personally present with us, the illusory energy cannot affect us. Because Krishna is like the sun. Maya is like darkness. Where there is the sun, there cannot be darkness. So in this way, Mahaprabhu, again very nicely, highlights this point to the Kurma Brahmana. That the best way, most powerful tactic we can use to overcome the illusory energy of the Lord is by attacking her. Attack is the best form of defense. Which means we need to plan our lives in such a way we're always engaged in Krishna consciousness. And particularly Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as is instructing Kurma Brahmana, that he wanted us to come a bit out of our comfort zone and go out and do outreach and share this method with others. And for every devotee who is engaged in outreach, Mahaprabhu has Mahaprabhu's personal blessings. Mahaprabhu is personally saying that I am personally present with them, and don't worry about the illusory energy, I will protect you from the illusory energy of the Lord. In the last couple of classes, we've been hearing a lot about Lord Shiva, the glories of Lord Shiva. And Mataji yesterday, she was, one of the pastimes, she was talking about the churning of the milk ocean. At that time, the hala hala poison comes out. Then Shiva, he wants to go. Devotees, they come, approach Shiva and request Shiva to come. And at that time, Shiva, before he heads off to drink the poison, he first tries to convince his wife, Durga Devi, tries to explain the situation as a dutiful husband. So one of the things he tells Mother Parvati to convince her to give her permission to him to go off and drink this poison. It's a very nice verse, very important verse in relation to this, in relation to doing outreach, sharing the message to others. Lord Shiva tells Mother Parvati that there is many different ways we can do devotional service, many different services we can offer Shri Shri Radha Gopinath, many different ways we can worship the divine couple. But Lord Shiva says there is one form of worship which is the topmost, which gives Shri Shri Radha Gopinath more pleasure than anything else. What is that form of worship? What is that form of devotional service? Lord Shiva, the greatest of all devotees, Vaishnavanam Yatha Sambhu, one of the 12 Mahajans, he shares his realization. He says that of all forms of worship, the highest form of worship of the Supreme Lord is by voluntarily taking up inconveniences for the benefit of other living entities. That is the highest form of worship. The highest service, the highest form of worship, the highest pleasure we can give to Shri Shri Radha Gopinath. When we ourselves take up some inconveniences, take up some austerities, for what? Not for our sake, but for the benefit of others, for the benefit of bringing others closer to Krishna's lotus feet, that is the highest worship one can offer. Then after making this statement, then Parvati Devi, she agrees. Okay, if this is the highest form of worship, then you have to do it. You have to go drink the hala hala poison. You have to take up this austerity for the pleasure of our worshipful Lord, Shri Shri Radha Gopinath. So then Mother Parvati, she gives her permission, and then Lord Shiva goes and drinks the poison. So again, coming back to doing outreach, we see Lord Shiva emphasizing this, we see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu emphasizing this, and by this we can bring the maximum pleasure to Shri Shri Radha Gopinath, and also simultaneously we ourselves will be protected from the illusory energy. And that is the personal assurance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. One other thing I was thinking of recently, Gaur Purnima is coming up, and I was thinking about in CC how it's given the flood of love of Godhead, which was started by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And while I was thinking about that, I was thinking actually just recently we were having these floods in New South Wales over the last 2 weeks. So I was thinking about these two things together. And I was trying to, some points of comparison came to mind. For example, like in these purports, one of the main themes that Prabhupada is talking about, main lessons Prabhupada is talking about is how to develop detachment. And Prabhupada is quoting, like in the last couple of verses, Prabhupada was giving Lord Shiva as the ideal example of detachment. Who is Lord Shiva's consort? Lord Shiva's consort is none other than Durga Devi, the mature energy. So he has everything right at his command. Whatever he wants, he can easily get from Durga Devi. Any single sense pleasure for his sense gratification, he can get. But despite having Durga Devi as his wife, despite having Durga Devi right next to him, who can satisfy any one of his desires, Prabhupada explains, he doesn't use her to satisfy even a single desire for sense gratification. Prabhupada says he doesn't even use her to make a house for himself. He just stays like that in the open. So this Prabhupada is saying, from this we can understand how detached Lord Shiva is. Just like say it's some fasting day, like it's Janmashtami, and everyone is fasting, and different devotees, they have different services. But all the devotees, they're fasting whole day. Now one devotee, he's fasting, and he's doing the shoe rack service. He's doing the service of arranging all the shoes into the different racks, giving the coupons to devotees. And then there is devotee number 2. And his service is that he has to help in the kitchen, and after he helps in the kitchen, he has to come and serve all the prasadam to the guests that come. So the devotee number 2, he's fasting himself, but in front of him, he has all of these wonderful arrangements of prasad. He has pizza in front of him, he has pav bhaji, he has burgers, all nicely cooked by Prem Sagar Prabhu, Mohit Prabhu, Asim Prabhu and his team. So he's fasting, but he has all of these different nice arrangements of prasad right in front of him, and he's serving that prasad to others. So which of these two devotees will find it more austere? Naturally, the devotee who is serving the prasad, his job is a bit more difficult, because that temptation is there right in front of him. And while he's serving the prasad, other devotees are telling him, Prabhu, you don't have to fast whole day, it's okay, You can break your fast, if you're feeling a bit tired or weak, out of Vaishnava care, devotees will come and naturally tell you that, if you can't handle the fast, it's okay, you can eat some fruits or you can break, Krishna will understand, it's okay, First priority is health. So like this, devotees are coming and telling him, and right in front of him, he has so many nice arrangements of prasad in front of him. So naturally, that situation is much more difficult than for the devotee who's just dealing with shoes and giving coupons. He doesn't have that temptation in front of him. So in the same way, Prabhupada is explaining, Lord Shiva's case is like that. He has Durga Devi sitting right next to him, Whatever he wants, he can get from Durga Devi. But he is so detached, he is so fixed on serving Shri Shri Radha Gopinath, he doesn't even use her to build a house for himself. That's why Prabhupada says, or that's why the Shastra says, Vaishnavanam Yatha Shambhu. One of the qualities the Bhagavatam highlights of why Lord Shiva is the greatest of all Vaishnavas is because of his detachment. Detachment means, Prabhupada explains in one purport, that if someone is actually very detached from mature energy, one must understand that at the same time, simultaneously, he must be very attached to the lotus feet of Gopinath, to the lotus feet of Shri Shri Radha and Krishna. To the degree we're attached to Krishna's lotus feet, Prabhupada explains, to that degree, we will become detached from the illusory energy. To that degree, we will become detached from sense gratification. So the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada, they have been highlighting the detachment of Lord Shiva, how detached Lord Shiva is. He has Durga Devi right next to him, but he doesn't slightly deviate from his bhajan. He doesn't slightly deviate from his sadhana and seva. So because Lord Shiva is so detached, it must mean that simultaneously he has intense attachment to Krishna. Because unless he had that intense attachment to Krishna's lotus feet, he wouldn't be able to demonstrate such detachment. So this is one of the lessons Prabhupada has been talking about in this section of Bhagavatam that we should learn. And Prabhupada has been saying that we should follow in the footsteps of Lord Shiva and cultivate detachment from sense gratification. So, coming back to the flood. So in this material world we see, when there is a flood, what happens? Nrsimha Kavach Prabhu, he was sharing his own personal story. How him and his wife, their car got swept away by the flood. The car is gone. They can't use it anymore. And people's houses, they get taken away by the flood. And family members get separated. All the material possessions we were very attached to, they go with the flood. Like this, the flood carries away whatever things we have in our life. So just like in this material we see, when a flood comes, it separates us from different material possessions. In the same way, the Shastras explain, when we take shelter of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's lotus feet, when we dive deep, immerse ourselves in the flood of love of Godhead, started by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we'll also be separated. We'll also become detached from our houses, from our cars, from our family members. All material attachments we had, they'll also go away. Being detached doesn't mean we completely become aloof, but we don't see them as objects of sense gratification. We see them in relationship to Krishna. So that material attachment aspect comes out when the flood of love of Godhead comes and takes over, and the spiritual vision comes by the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which means the house as seeing as my house meant for my enjoyment, we see it. This is just Krishna's temple, and I am the servant of Krishna. I am living in this temple of Krishna, worshipping Krishna, and one sees his family members as all servants of Sri Shri Radha Gopinath. This son of mine is Gopinath's servant, this wife or this husband, they're all servants of Krishna. One loses all these material attachments, one loses all these material affections, and one starts to see things in proper spiritual perspective. So just like a material flood, it separates us from our possessions, from our houses, cars, family members, so on and so forth. Similarly, the flood of love of Godhead, started by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, helps us overcome all material attachments. And Prabhu was sharing also how this current flood is said to be a 1 in 500 year flood, or a 1 in 1,000 year flood. How some people are saying like this. So in the same way, this flood started by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is no ordinary flood. How often does Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu come? It's given that once in a day of Brahma, Lord Krishna comes, and in one day of Brahma there is 1,000 Divya Yugas. Each Divya Yuga has 4.32 million years. So one day of Brahma has 4.32 billion years. And such is also the duration of Brahma's night. So one whole day of Brahma is 8.64 billion years. So that is one full 24 hours Brahma's day. So once in 8.64 billion years, Krishna comes. And after Krishna comes, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu comes. So I was thinking that this flood started by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is no ordinary event. It's not a 1 in 100 year flood. It's not a 1 in 1,000 year flood or 10,000 year flood. But it's a flood which is a 1 in 8.64 billion year flood. So that's how often this flood comes. And this flood will keep on going, at least for the next 10,000 years, Prabhupada explains. This is the golden age. Just like the rains continued on for 2 weeks, 2 weeks of incessant rain, and the flooding was happening around New South Wales. Similarly, Prabhupada explains that these rains of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mercy, which started this flood of love of Godhead, it started 500 years ago, and this flood will keep on going, keep on taking over the whole universe, at least for the next 10,000 years of the golden era. So we should, Prabhupada explains, we should make the most of this time. Firstly, we have to perfect ourselves, because this is the best time, the easiest time to practice Krishna consciousness, the easiest time to us going back to God, and the easiest time to preach and to make devotees. So we have a lot of work to do. In the 500 years is gone, another 9,500 years is left. So during this next 9,500 years, we should work with a sense of emergency, as Prabhupada says, to try and save as many fallen conditioned souls as we can. Because after this period, preaching will be a bit more difficult. So while the time is right, while the time is in our favor, let us work very efficiently, let us work very vigorously to try and bring as many souls to Krishna's lotus feet over the next 9,500 years. Okay, well, I'll stop here. There's just a few minutes if anyone has any comments or questions. Yes, Maj.
Just a comment. I just was appreciating that comparison of blood to Chaitanya's blood, or not blood. And yesterday at Lisbia, and the flood came into Rati's house in Manly, and she was telling us how it was unstoppable because the water had all full of pipes. So it wasn't just coming from the outside, the water was coming up through the drains, and it was just coming out of everywhere in the house, it was just coming up unstoppable. And I was just thinking, as I was reflecting on that as well, the same, another comparison maybe, that this flood of Lord Chaitanya's mercy is unstoppable, and we can jump in and be part of it or not, but it will continue on regardless.
Yes. Another comparison Prabhupada makes in today's Prabhupada. Prabhupada is saying that Haridas Thakur, he wasn't born in a Brahmana family, and he wasn't a Brahmana, but still, by his Krishna consciousness, he was able to overcome the illusory energy. In the same way, just like the flood, it doesn't discriminate which background you are. The flood just sweeps away everyone. Young, old, this background, this country, that background. In the same way, the merciful flood of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it doesn't discriminate what background we're coming from. This family, that family. Doesn't matter who we are. If we just take shelter of the instructions of Mahaprabhu's devotees, we'll be swept away by the flood. Another thing Prabhupada explains in his purport in Adi Lila is during the flood, like I was distributing books and I was talking to one person saying, oh, your garden is so nice, you have so beautiful flowers, you must have been happy. So much rain came over the past few weeks. And this devotee, this person said that actually the rains was actually bad, because when it rains too much, then it actually acts in a negative